Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 90 of Fracking Nightmare. And here we are. I never anticipated we get this far into the series without a frack taking place in the UK. But somehow I get a sense that the industry is determined that I don't reach episode 100 without that being the case. So we're going to have to see how that unfolds in the coming weeks. But one of the comments that I've heard increasingly over the last few months is, Ian, that you never give any voice to the industry. Well, funnily enough, I don't think that anyone in the industry is going to seriously want to engage with me or anybody else, come to that has done their research, which is why at least I will acknowledge that Tom Pickering of INEOS did actually come along to a screening of voices from the gas fields in Falkirk in the autumn of last year. But that, to my knowledge, is the only industry representative that has ever had the courage to actually come to an event that has been staged to try to raise awareness about this pernicious industry. Well, tonight is no different. Because I certainly do not have any live guest that represents the unconventional gas industry, but I would like to play an interview that was given by Stephen Bowler, the Chief Executive Officer of iGas, and he gave this interview on proactiveinvestor.com a few days ago. And what I'd like to do is play this, I think it's about 7 minutes or so, play this interview in its entirety. But please, before we do that, quickly grab a pen and paper, because what I'd like you to do is list, one, the number of outright lies that Stephen Bowler tells during the course of this interview, and also the amount of deceit and obfuscation. And now, Stephen Bowler, we'll look at Stephen Bowler's background after the interview. And, it might perhaps explain why he makes some of the claims that he does and is still able to keep a straight face. But meanwhile, let's play this interview. I hope you've got the pen and paper ready. And, anyone who wants to send me their answers, then, we'll discuss them next week. But take a look at this.
So after Third Energy's fracking application was approved in Yorkshire earlier this week, attention is turning to the players within the industry, including iGas, which has submitted its own planning application for the Tinker Lane project to Nottinghamshire County Council. Well, Steve Bowler is the Chief Executive. He joins us now. So Steve, now that the first council since the previous ban has approved a fracking application, do you think the pressure or scrutiny on other applications will be less? In other words, will it be easier for companies to get approval now?
Good morning, firstly. But I think for me, obviously, and Third Energy have made, I think, what was a very sensible statement around approval is not a victory, it's a responsibility, and for me that's absolutely paramount. And as an industry, we've been producing oil and gas onshore UK for 50 years or more. So actually, it's for us, we have these responsibilities with our operating sites on a day-to-day basis, and iGas has 100 producing sites across the UK. So it is absolutely a responsibility. In terms of planning applications, then each council will look at all of the planning applications on their own merits. But I think what we were very pleased to see is that North Yorkshire County Council have recognised that it is something that can be done safely in an environmentally responsible manner.
Okay, so you're talking about responsibility and approvals being approved or otherwise based on merit. So I suppose it's unfair of me to ask about what you'll think will happen for Quadrilla in its appeal in Lancashire. Obviously, you're not party to the full planning application that it has put in.
Yeah, they've been through a public inquiry. So currently, the planning inspector is writing her report, which will go into central government on or before the 4th of July, and then central government will opine on those two appeals. So I can't possibly say which way that will go. What I can say is that fracking itself was not a concern even for the council. I don't believe it was more around noise and vehicle movement. So we look forward to the outcome of that at some point in the summer.
Obviously, public opinion is very important. And do you think that by completing fracking safely and cleanly, the industry can shift some of the negative perceptions which have been dogging these applications?
Yeah, I think there's a nervousness by people because it's perceived to be something that's new. I completely understand that, but what people really need to also understand is that there have been millions of wells drilled across the world that have involved the fracking technique, and actually we've got a gold standard in the UK for regulation and a long operating history. So I think we've seen that in the past. In fact, even with mobile phone masts, and when they started to be put in, there was a lot of public worry about it, and now it's something that's part of everyone's day-to-day life. So that's absolutely what we're striving towards, is for people to recognise that this is something that we can do responsibly and safely.
Okay, so you've given yourself gold standard certification there. So I'm wondering what expectations or plans that you have for iGas and its own applications.
Yeah, we've got two applications now in North Nottinghamshire, or in Nottinghamshire. One at Springs Road, which we submitted towards the end of last year, and we expect to hear back on that in the third quarter of this year. And we've just submitted another application to drill a well in Nottinghamshire at a site called Tinker Lane. At the same time, where we have completed the 3D seismic acquisition at the end of last year, and we're interpreting that data. So operationally, we're being very active and busy, and we're on track with all of our operations at the moment.
Okay, so just to be clear, do any of those applications involve fracking, or do all of them involve fracking?
No, the ones in Nottinghamshire are for shale wells, so to penetrate the shale, but they're not to frack. They're to core and log the wells. So as you go down, you take core samples and monitor as you go down through the well. So if the geology is, as we believe, positive for shale, then we would go back subsequently and apply to frack those wells.
Okay, so you've told me that you're very active. You've been described as very astute as well. What about progress in your group's present-day conventional oil and gas production operations?
Yeah, that remains very stable. We're identifying some opportunities across the piece, and as we said in our trading statement yesterday, our AGM statement, we anticipate production, principally oil, to be about 2,500 to 2,700 barrels of oil per day this year. So, it's a stable production base. We have cash on the balance sheet. And as I said to you before, for us in this oil price environment, which still remains volatile, although we have seen it today go through $50 a barrel, which is much better than it was in the first quarter, cash is all important to the company.
Okay, finally, June the 23rd, it is the EU referendum. There were concerns that should we vote to leave the EU, there might be disruption to energy here in the UK. Is your industry talking about that possibility at all?
Well, I think that's going to be something that shows itself over time. But as I look on my screen today, I can see that from UK electricity generation, over half of that is being provided by gas, less than 3% from wind and 21% from nuclear. So gas is obviously vital in UK electricity, and also obviously for heating. It's over 80% of our UK heating is from gas. So it is a vital ingredient in the UK energy mix, and half of that we import. and it'll remain to be seen, in the global markets where gas goes, where we import it from Qatar or Norway. So, I think instability on leaving the euro won't help UK energy.
Steve Bowler, Chief Executive of iGas, thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
There we go, Steve, or Stephen, or Steve as he prefers to be called, apparently, Bowler, the Chief Executive Officer of iGas. But let's have a look at Steve Bowler's background. So this is straight off the iGas website. So here you have it. Steve became Chief Executive Officer in May 2015. That was, of course, after Andrew Austin stepped down following a bit of a shareholder revolt, really, over some of his dodgy dealings. He'd apparently been taking some lessons from David Lenigas and got himself into a little bit of hot water there. So Steve Bowler steps into the breach, but he had joined iGas as the Chief Financial Officer in 2011. So let's take a look at his oil and gas experience. He qualified as a chartered accountant with Touche Ross, now Deloitte. In 1999, Steve joined ABN AMRO Hall Govert, now part of Jefferies, where he acted as advisor and broker to a wide range of UK-listed companies in the oil and gas sector. On the financial side, Steve advised Star Energy on its IPO in 2004. The Star Energy producing assets were acquired by iGas in 2011, transforming iGas at that time to become one of the UK leading onshore oil and gas companies. Over the past 4 years, Steve has been a key member of the executive team that has successfully completed 4 acquisitions, 2 bond raising and an equity issue, in addition to the farm outs of Total and more recently INEOS. So steeped in finance, and I'm sure he's an extremely able financial professional, but now he has stepped into the role of CEO. And you notice that the first thing he said was that, as far as he was concerned, the decision of the Yorkshire Council was not a victory, it was a responsibility. So perhaps everyone who lives in any area that iGas are targeting should now write to Steve Bowler and ask him exactly how he defines his responsibility. Because he also said responsibility is paramount. Well, of course it is. And so, the responsibility to the community, although he didn't specify that. So perhaps we should also ask him to clarify exactly who he feels a responsibility to. Because as a former financial officer, of course, his responsibility would have been to the management of the company and primarily to the shareholders. And the shareholders tend not to be concerned too much about responsibility to the community. He said that iGas had been producing for 50 years. Well, maybe true. But is it relevant? Because that production has not come from unconventional resources, which, as any regular viewer of this program and anyone who's done any amount of research for themselves will know, is like chalk and cheese compared to unconventional gas exploitation. He made the observation that fracking wasn't a concern of the North Yorkshire County Council. Now, this is an extremely disingenuous observation. And, once again, one has to wonder about the corporate mentality that makes this kind of observation. But, of course, it once again depends on who he perceives that he has responsibility to. Because what was certainly clear was that the North Yorkshire County Council members had been given legal advice, and that legal advice was not made public. So unlike in Lancashire, where the Lancashire County Councillors demanded that the legal advice be made public, demanded that it be put in writing, and of course was subsequently challenged because that legal advice was found wanting. North Yorkshire County Council, to the best of my knowledge, did not make that legal advice public. But I think it's fair to assume And North Yorkshire County Council could, of course, refute this by simply releasing that information into the public domain. I think it's safe to assume that the councillors were told very clearly that they could only concentrate on a very, very narrow aspect of the planning application, particularly traffic movements, noise, and impact on local community. They were not able to look at the process, and they certainly were not able to take account of the fact that this is one well, which is the start of potential massive industrialisation. He said that iGas, and I'm sure he was speaking for the industry, have a responsibility to do this safely and cleanly. Yet that has certainly not been achieved anywhere in this country by any operator to date, and iGas themselves do not exactly have a clean bill of health following their reluctance to permit an independent specialist onto the site at Barton Moss after some rogue chemicals were discovered in the outflow, the illegal outflow, I might add, from the well site. Stephen also made the observation that millions of wells have been drilled and fracked using this process. Well, once again, to use the plural here is somewhat of an exaggeration. It's certainly true that probably something in the region of about 1 million wells have been drilled and fracked in the US, but any suggestion that those wells have been drilled safely and cleanly and have not caused any environmental problems is disingenuous, to say the least, but cognitively dissonant in the extreme. And in fact, this is the sort of behaviour that one would normally be or would normally expect of a sociopath. Now, I'm not for one moment suggesting that Stephen Bowler is displaying sociopathic tendencies here, because it's quite possible that he hasn't felt it appropriate to do the research. He's just simply been relying on the alleged technical experts within his own organisation. But if Stephen Bowler is capable of independent thought and is capable of some genuine analysis of the research that is in the public domain, then he would know very well that his statements are incorrect. He also made the observation about gold standard in the UK. This tired old piece of tripe is trotted out with remarkable regularity. Yet all you have to do is ask this industry to specify a single piece of legislation, with the exception of the recent Infrastructure Act, which attempts to obfuscate the whole process of hydraulic fracturing. But there is not a single piece of legislation in the UK that is specific to unconventional hydrocarbon extraction. Consequently, all of the regulations that are in place apply to conventional hydrocarbon extraction. And because the wells are subjected to very, very different pressures under the unconventional process, once again, it's disingenuous or outright ignorant to state that the UK has a gold standard. Likewise, to say that you have a long operating history, the reality is you don't, because although it's quite possible that you fracked, or iGas fracked the well at Doe Green before you appeared on the scene, but that if that was the case, then that was before there was any kind of scrutiny on the industry. And you certainly wouldn't be able to get away with that again. I think the relation, or the attempt at relating mobile phone masts, is also disingenuous, because there are still a lot of people who are investigating the health issues related to the proliferation of these phone masts, particularly the EMF impact on the very young, the fetus and the young people. And it certainly doesn't have a clean bill of health. And if anybody is so minded to take a look at that, then do look at the work of Barry Trower, a former government scientist who has made it his life's mission to expose the dangers associated with electromagnetic field emissions from the proliferation of things such as phone masts. Now, Stephen was also asked a question about whether the applications that iGas has submitted are related to fracking, and his immediate response was no. But then he went on to qualify it, because what he stated was that the wells that they were looking to drill would be exploratory wells where they could take core samples. Well, the purpose of drilling the exploratory well to take core samples is to identify the pay zones where they could go in and get the biggest bang for their buck, the greatest return through fracking. Now, he did go on to say that once they've taken the core samples, they would have to then submit a further application to be able to frack. But the reality is those wells are being drilled with every intention of ultimately being fracked. He then went on to really waffle a little bit about the implications of potentially leaving the EU. And the reality is that the vast majority of gas imports that we bring into the UK come from Norway and from Qatar. And the last time I checked, neither of them was in the EU. So the likelihood of there being any impact on the importation of gas once Britain is out of the EU is likely to be slim to none. And the same with oil imports, because there aren't any EU countries producing any significant amounts of oil, which is actually one of the reasons why the EU would certainly like to keep the UK in the EU, because anyone who believes that the UK has control over its natural resources while a member of the EU clearly hasn't been paying attention. Because it shouldn't take you too much effort to find that ultimately, in the event of crisis, it would be the EU, the bureaucratic federal state, that would determine where those resources were deployed. So, Stephen Bowler, I'm afraid that you don't get too many points from me. And consequently, I would advise you not to show up at any public event that I'm hosting. Of course, you're more than welcome. But I will, of course, then expose the lies, the deceit, the obfuscation of yourself, of iGas, and of the industry in general. And you know very well, Mr. Bowler, that once people take a look at this for themselves, they know that basically either you haven't done the research and you are literally locking yourself in deliberate ignorance, or you're lying. And, well, if you think that I'm going a little bit over the top there, of course, you could always sue me. But good luck with that, because it seems that Rathlin beat you to it. Well, let's just take a look at why Mr. Bowler may have been of an interest. Good job his first name doesn't begin with an E, isn't it, really? That might be a little bit unfortunate. This is a list of the directors' stock holdings and the deals that have been granted to those deals, these stock options, if you like. So if we look at the price at which these stock options were awarded, and I've only got the last couple of years here. So in January of 2014, Stephen Bowler was offered 1,000 or 1,100 stock options, but the price then was well over £1. And then he picked up a bunch more a year later, but the price then was 30 pence. And then a bunch more in April of 2015, but the price then was 28 pence and 28 and a quarter pence. And then he was gifted some stock options in July last year, 3,600. So they will vest probably over a 5-year period, so starting probably in around 2020 or so. And then gifted another 6,000 shares in October of last year. So he's sitting on a total of a little over 100,000 shares. Now, apart from the ones that he was gifted, the rest, which is looking like about 3,600 or so, the rest don't exactly have much value right now, and that's primarily because the iGas stock price is currently sitting at 18 pence. So it is in Stephen Bowler's financial interests, obviously, to push the stock price up beyond the point at which his stock options actually have a value. And if he gets them, up above 30 odd pence, then obviously they could have significant value. And, it's really not too surprising, is it, that the prospect of significant financial gain is going to cause you to blinker yourself to the travesty that this industry effectively causes wherever it leaves a footprint. Well, I'm going to take a short break here, and we're going to be looking at another issue relating to Third Energy in the second part. But during the break, we're going to look at get the right teeth in. We're going to look at a short video that's been produced by a wonderful and very dedicated activist. He calls himself, his YouTube channel is known as Fargo McCann. And this is a little video that he put together about Barclays and their support, or 97% ownership, one should say, of Third Energy. So we'll take a break and take a look at this. Well, it seems the Barclays video will actually be played at the end of part 2. But that was another Fargo McCann video, and I have a feeling that we could be playing a few more of those in the coming weeks. Excellent job there, Fargo, and keep them coming. And please do share those videos around, either on Facebook or YouTube. It all helps to stimulate people's curiosity and hopefully get them to do a little bit of research for themselves. So the iGas stock price. Stephen Bowler has nothing really to be proud of for his short tenure. The stock price obviously dumped right through 2014. Of course, that was the period where I was getting a lot of grief from the iGas stock forum, but I was simply trying to encourage the investors to do the smart thing and get out. I was trying to save them money, but hey, they know best. So the fact that the stock price is a little over 10% of what it was just 2.5 years ago is neither here nor there. But Mr. Bowler has presided over the company with the stock price hovering pretty much between 15 and 20 pence during his tenure. And even the recent decision by North Yorkshire County Council doesn't seem to have encouraged investors particularly much, really. One would have perhaps expected there to be a little more increase, but hey, I think people have been seriously burned. Of course, the smart money is elsewhere, and this is really the diehards, people who don't like to be proven wrong. But let's have a look at what's going on a wider basis, because here's the graph which looks at the situation over the last 10 years, because Stephen Bowler made the observation that the price of oil has gone back through the $50 marker. Well, it did momentarily. I think tonight it was operating at around just under $50, in fact at 49.72. And this is the graph that makes all the unconventional gas investors go, yeah, we're in a bull market here. It's all gravy from here. But of course, what they're actually not sharing with you is that graph is that little bit in the red box there. So they're conveniently ignoring the backstory. The backstory being, of course, that when oil was artificially manipulated up to $147 a barrel in July of 2008, come crashing down to $35 a barrel in October of the same year. And then we had the shale boom when, basically these companies were borrowing money, they hand over fist. Of course, the banks were simply printing the money for them. I mean, it's fake money. But obviously, these companies are now in a world of hurt. And then starting really at the beginning of 2014, we had this phenomenal tanking as the OPEC countries realized that the unconventional gas industry was going to potentially take a significant chunk of their market share. So they tanked the price down to, well, just a little over $25. But now, with the unconventional gas industry in absolute disarray everywhere else in the world, OPEC feel that they can lift the price, but they will not lift it above the point at which the unconventional gas industry can be profitable. In the US, some of the companies claim that they can be profitable at around about $40 a barrel. That remains to be seen. But the level of bankruptcies in the US is still at a record level. And part of that, and this is really the US unconventional gas industry taking a leaf straight out of the David Lenegas playbook, which is, just keep putting the BS out there. And, as long as enough dumbbutts believe you, then the money will roll in. But take a look here. Let's have a look at this graph again. Here's Chesapeake. And what we see in blue is the reserves that they reported to the SEC, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission. So in other words, on the basis that they have to be able to justify their stated reserves to the financial regulators, then they will err on the side of, I'll use the term loosely, caution. But look at the difference between what they tell the SEC and what they present to investors. So Chesapeake tells the SEC that it's got reserves somewhere in the region of 2.7 billion barrels, but tells investors it's actually got 13.4. Pioneer tell the SEC they've got 845 million barrels as reserves, but tell investors they got 11 billion barrels. Marathon, 787 million, but they tell investors are relatively conservative, 4.3 billion. Quicksilver, they say to the SEC they've got 177 million, but then investors 2.7. You get the picture. I mean, Goodrich here, they tell investors they got 75 million, and tell the SEC they got 75 million and tell investors they got 1.4 billion. So here's the difference in this box over on the lower right-hand side. Across 73 companies in total, they tell the SEC that they got 33 billion barrels in reserves, but they tell investors they've got 163.5 billion barrels. So do you get the picture? This is not one company. This is industry-wide deception. The whole unconventional gas industry is a Ponzi scheme. And in some cases, it's simply money laundering, as is the case quite probably with Rathlin Energy, who are laundering money from sub-Saharan Africa through a company called Azimuth, which is then depositing the funds into Sunderland Holdings. And of course, if I've got that completely wrong, Rathlin, well, you can sue me, can't you? Oh, you've already done that. So the onus is on the companies to be transparent, to share the information, but they won't, because they cannot be transparent, because basically everything about the unconventional gas industry is absolute smoke and mirrors. And anyone who has done the research basically knows this. And where we're at right now is it is literally a case of, can the industry and the government blag? Can they blag enough people into total apathy to be able to get the trucks rolling? Or can those people who have done the research, can those people who are genuinely concerned about the magnitude of the devastation, of the contamination, of the negative health impacts that this industry has caused wherever it has established a footprint, can those people actually stimulate sufficient curiosity in the wider community to get them to participate in preventing this industry from getting a foothold in the UK? The industry is absolutely relying on the population of North Yorkshire throwing their hands up now and saying, oh, well, we did everything we possibly could. We fought a good campaign, but we lost. No, you didn't. No, you didn't lose at all. The government effectively stacked the odds. It made sure that there were enough Tory councillors who were clearly given their marching orders. And it would be absolutely insightful, of course, to have one of those councillors have sufficient courage to actually share the briefing that they were given prior to that meeting. But that's not likely to happen anytime soon. Those people who were put on that planning committee to push this through really didn't ask any questions. All they had to do was sit through 2 days of presentations and then cast their vote. They weren't asked to justify the reason for voting in favour. They simply put their hand up like the good political puppets that they are. Whereas those 4 councillors who had the courage to vote against this proposition had clearly done their research and articulated their opposition remarkably well. They had clearly fulfilled the role of an elected representative of the people. The others just participated in destroying democracy. So North Yorkshire County Council gave Third Energy, 97% owned by Barclays Bank, permission to frack their existing well at Kirby Misperton. So we'll take a break now, and this time I think we will look at Fargo's Barclays video. Another excellent video there from Fargo McCann. And that video has contributed to inspiring communities all around the country from to let Barclays know their strength of feeling about their ownership of Third Energy. And word on the vine is that Barclays are actually looking for a buyer for Third Energy. And, it was suggested that maybe INEOS would step in, but if INEOS step in, then that would immediately mean that there would be a few letters into the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, on the basis of starting to establish a monopoly, which I'm sure INEOS or Jim Ratcliffe of INEOS would love to have. And of course, unfortunately for INEOS, or for us rather, this is chump change for INEOS. They have plenty of resources to throw at this. And of course, they're not looking to market the gas in the traditional sense. They've made it very clear that they are simply looking to mine the gas as feedstock, because they see that potentially as a cheaper option than transshipping the gas in from the US, which is now starting to happen, I believe. So over the last couple of weekends, here we go, we've seen protests outside Barclays Bank. I think we have Huddersfield, Sheffield. This was actually in the southwest. This was Exeter's Young Greens, showing solidarity with the people of North Yorkshire and holding their protest outside Barclays in Exeter. So if you want to do something constructive, if you're not actually participating right now in any anti-fracking activity, then consider, if you are an account holder of Barclays, one of two things. Go talk to them in the first instance. Of course, in the branch, they will know nothing about it. So you will add to their education, and you can ask them and inform them, and maybe take a copy of Voices from the Gas Fields, or take some of the literature that's freely available now, particularly from the Frack Off website or from Jojo Meta. Take some of the literature in there and encourage them to do their own research, and then ask them why it is that their bank is actually supporting an industry that will potentially destroy a significant chunk of the beautiful North York moors. It's not a question of if, it's simply a question of when. And John Dewar is as equally capable of the deceit and obfuscation as Stephen Bowler, as David Montagu-Smith, as Francis Egan, as Jim Ratcliffe, as Tom Pickering. You will never, ever see any of these individuals at a public meeting debating with the community that has done their research. They can't. They have no moral high ground. They cannot produce a shred of evidence to prove that this is a safe and provably safe industry. They can't. They have to rely on people literally being zombies. So where we're at, this is really about the communities coming together. And communities are going to see a lot more activity now, because INEOS have certainly stated that they are intending to start significant seismic activity. I think iGas are also looking to do some seismic activity. So whenever you see the thumper trucks, or you see markers in fields which are probably establishing the line of the explosive charges that will be used for the seismic testing, then you know that the Mother-Frackers are moving into your community, and it's time to start taking an interest. And if there isn't an anti-fracking community in your area, then maybe it's time to start one for yourself. And you don't need anybody else. There's plenty of support out there, but you don't need anybody else. All the information that you need, there are community support packs available. Just punch it into any search engine and you will find all the information, and you can identify for yourself who perhaps you would like to bring into your community to help raise awareness of this pernicious industry. So by the way, I just want to say Northern Ireland is really behind the 8 ball right now. There's a video that was posted, I think, earlier today or late last night, of a young lad there that had come up to support the community in the Woodburn Forest, and he was brutally arrested. Well, he was hanging on to what looked like a strawberry split ice cream, and full credit to him, because he certainly wasn't going to let that ice cream drop. But the behaviour of the Northern Ireland Police Service was clearly straight out of the Greater Manchester TAU playbook. And a remarkable example, he was just simply standing in front of the gates as a peaceful protest, and then the Northern Ireland Police Service decided that basically they were going to literally manhandle him into the van. So do take a look at that video, because the bottom line is that the police are bullies when they are in the majority. In East Yorkshire, the Humberside police made it very, very clear that whilst they held the advantage through numbers, then they would refuse to facilitate any kind of peaceful protest. On the occasions when the protectors seriously outnumbered the police, guess what? There was a different ball game. And peaceful protest was indeed facilitated, not necessarily willingly. So let's take a look at what it is that we really need to do, because the game is really hotting up. And, we have to do this, what we do, without anger, simply on the basis of objective observation. And one of the objective observations that was made recently to the British media was by this guy, Roberto Saviano, who is actually an expert on the mafia. And he came over to this country and he made the observation, and he said the UK is the most corrupt country on the planet. And I have to say, I'm in absolute agreement. And the corruption that exists in the third world is at least honest corruption. It's open. Everyone knows what's going on. You know how business is done. You know who's making the big bucksheesh. But in this country, of course, it's all done through tax havens. And this was Roberto's observation. He said it's not the bureaucracy. It's not the police. It's not the politics. Well, we beg to perhaps have a difference of opinion there. But what is corrupt is the financial capital. 90% of the owners of capital in London have their headquarters offshore. Jersey and the Caymans are the access gates to criminal capital in Europe, and the UK is the country that allows that. And guess where many of the unconventional gas companies are registered? Rathlin Energy, Jersey, Third Energy, Cayman. So we are actually permitting this to happen, and the industry just says, well, not enough people really understand what's going on, so, we'll just do this. And what they're planning to do, of course, is the reason that the likes of Rathlin Energy are keeping their account showing that they are have a negative net worth of minus 25 million, is so that even when they start production, which probably isn't going to happen anytime soon, but that they won't pay any corporation tax for a long, long time, because they will simply be writing off the deficits. This is absolute manipulation. It's not illegal, for sure. It's not illegal, but the chief executive officers and the chief financial officers know very well that by not paying the corporation tax, which allows them to push more down to the bottom line, which allows them to give a bigger return to the shareholders, which pushes the share price up at the expense of the community in those countries where they operate. So these companies and those that work with them are absolute parasites. They are parasites on the communities where they operate. All this BS about giving 100% of the business rates to the local community, or 6% of the revenue, whatever revenue that may be, because INEOS are going to take it as feedstock anyway. So this is all BS, and they know that the savings that they're making by not paying corporation tax are 3-4 times what they're going to be paying out to the local community. And it is we, the people, that allow them to do it. We simply need to make sure that there is a wider education. So things are moving at a phenomenal pace. We have an EU referendum coming up, and I completely understand why it is that many people within the anti-fracking community think that staying in the EU is a good thing because of the environmental legislation, the EU Water Framework Directive, the European legislation on human rights. But really, this is the sugarcoating on the cyanide. Just ask yourself, who makes the EU laws? It's the lobbyists. It's those who are primarily supporting the corporations, the corporate agenda. You're being lured into the EU on the basis that once you're in, you can't get out, and then they can introduce this raft of legislation of TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which will have supremacy over EU law. So EU law already has supremacy over British law, and then TTIP will have supremacy over EU law. And to do this, they just want Britain to give away their last vestiges of national sovereignty. So just as with the unconventional gas industry, we need people to take a look, a deeper look, at the implications of getting out or staying in the EU. And, actually taking control. Identifying who it is that makes your laws. Because if anyone tells you that it is MEPs who are responsible for establishing legislation in Europe, we've been a member of the EU for 43 years now. And after 43 years, very, very few people know how European legislation becomes established. They have no idea who is responsible for it. So they would rather gift away the knowledge that legislation is established within the home country parliament and gift it away to faceless bureaucrats. So we have to get involved in every way, shape or form. And there is a big problem particularly amongst the younger element within the community. And that is that so much is done online. We have some wonderful activists within the anti-fracking community right across the age spectrum. But I would have to say that a significant proportion of those are probably the higher side of 45, 50. And that is because a lot of young people are still corralled by their electronic devices. You walk down the street. How many times do you see people doing this? And admittedly, this applies to all ages. But particularly groups of young people. They're not actually talking to each other. They're just sort of on their phones. Well, that obviously has a place, but we've got to be getting it in balance. And we've got to get people out meeting people. In France, there's a lot going on right now in France. And communities in France, of course, they use social media. But you know how the farmers communicate in France? And the farmers in France wield a lot of power. They communicate when they meet at the farmers' markets. It's face to face. And the communities that have been most effective in fighting against the unconventional gas industry are those communities that, of course, they do stuff online. But the real work, the real activism, the strategic discussions are held in face-to-face meetings. And, this 21st century phenomena of everyone sitting at home on their computer, and they think that, keyboard activism is the way to go. And there's a role for keyboard activists, absolutely. There are those people who, for varying reasons, cannot go outside. And so these people have a tremendous role to play in terms of keyboard activism. But for those of us that are able-bodied, those of us that, still actually enjoy meeting people on a social basis, then it's get out, meet people, hold meetings. So here's a cartoon that I saw a little while ago, and it's everyone sitting there. It's hashtag city, hashtag ban knives, hashtag united for her, hashtag stand with her, hashtag do something, hashtag do something, hashtag do something. Meanwhile, someone's getting mugged and screaming, please help, do something. Clicktivism. What is clicktivism? Clicktivism is the pollution of activism with the logic of consumerism, marketing and computer science, in promoting the illusion that surfing the web can change the world. Clicktivism is to activism what McDonald's is to a slow-cooked meal. It may look like food, but the life-giving nutrients are long gone. The industry and the corporations have created the phenomena of petitions and online activism because ultimately no one cares. You know, petitions, yes, they can have a use in terms of raising awareness within a particular community, but are they actually going to change anything? Absolutely not. And the other phenomena that is almost unique, I think, to the UK is the Downing Street petition being submitted to number 10. And I certainly, you know, hold nothing against the people that are doing this. They all have their own reasons for doing it, but I've just literally selected a random pics of people outside Downing Street, you know, all submitting their petitions, their letters, you know, for multiple reasons. And here's the guy in the nice, crisp white shirt and tie who opens the door to them all every 15 minutes and says, yes, thank you very much. I'll pass it on to Mr. Cameron immediately and make sure that it gets his attention. And as soon as the door's shut, it goes in the bin. Of course, there's a limited PR benefit. And of course, the people who participate feel that they've done something positive. Well, in the scheme of things, it's minuscule. What really works is community activism. It's getting your community active. Recently, one of Stephen Bowler's management team in iGas made the observation that the north of England was certainly going to be a tough area because it was very clear that the communities were seriously opposed to the gas industry coming into their areas. They had no social license. But he also went on to say that there were other areas of the country, like the South East and the East Midlands, that presented opportunities. You know, these guys, they are able to look and see what's occurring. They're able to determine for themselves where communities are really getting their act together. We have to make sure, the collective we have to make sure that every community where this industry has set its sights has an awareness and that they understand that if this industry rolls into town, there is a very real risk of contamination of the water, the soil, the air, and serious negative health impacts. And Stephen Bowler, if you want to challenge anything that I've said tonight, then you are very welcome to come along to Leeds on Saturday afternoon, where I shall be presenting and discussing at an event there at the White Rose Banqueting Suite, 67 Tong Road, Leeds, LS12 1HQ. Well, we'll be discussing the EU referendum and the implications of staying in and the implications of coming out. And if Stephen Bowler wants to come along and discuss unconventional gas exploitation, I'd be delighted to participate in that discussion with you. Thank you for joining me this evening. I will see you in 2 weeks, just 3 days before the EU referendum. So meanwhile, please do your research and make sure that you know precisely why you're voting the way you're going to vote. Thank you and good night.